Hello and welcome to today's deep dive. Before we even begin the discussion, I want to just take a second to extend a very warm welcome to you, our listener. I really want to offer a sincere divine blessing for your day and for the entire week you have ahead of you. May your time be filled with profound peace and true purpose.
Yes, absolutely. It really is a privilege to have you joining us for this exploration today.
So today, we are immersing ourselves in a text that is really just a cornerstone for ancient history, theology, cultural identity, all of it. We're looking at Exodus chapter 13.
A massive chapter.
Huge. And to guide this deep dive, we are pulling from some incredibly detailed study notes found in two really comprehensive sources. That's the Holman Study Bible and the NAA Study Bible.
And, these sources are invaluable because they move way beyond just a surface-level reading of the text.
Right, right.
They reconstruct the really complex, often harsh realities of the ancient Near East. They give us the cultural scaffolding we need to actually understand what we're reading.
And that is exactly our mission today. We are not just, summarizing some famous ancient narrative that's been made into a dozen movies.
Right.
Our objective is to decode the hidden cultural, the historical, the geographical secrets embedded right there in the text. We want to understand the underlying reasoning behind these highly specific rituals, dissect the strategic choices of their escape route, and really uncover what these monumental events meant to the people actually living through them.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with one of the most striking and honestly challenging commands placed right at the beginning of the chapter.
Yeah, the consecration.
Exactly. The text issues a mandate to consecrate or set apart every firstborn. And to a modern audience, a divine claim over every firstborn child and animal sounds remarkably severe.
It does. It sounds incredibly severe to us. But in the ancient Near East, you have to understand that the status of the firstborn was the absolute bedrock of their socioeconomic stability.
Right.
The Hebrew word utilized here is bikor, and it's a prominent term. It occurs roughly 120 times across the Old Testament, and the consecration to the bikor carries just immense weight when you view it against the broader regional jurisprudence of that era.
Because looking at the historical comparisons in our sources, this wasn't a concept that was just unique to the Israelites. I mean, we can examine Babylonian laws dating back to the 8th century BC.
Or even older, the Assyrian codes from the 14th and 15th centuries BC.
Yes. Those legal frameworks explicitly dictate that the firstborn son is legally entitled to a double portion of the family inheritance.
And that double portion wasn't just, a sign of favoritism from the parents. It was an economic necessity. The text actually connects this concept back to Genesis 49.3, which describes the firstborn as the strength of the father.
The strength of the father.
Exactly. In an agrarian society with really high mortality rates, the firstborn represented the continuation of the family line. He held the highest social position and shouldered the primary responsibility for the family's future survival.
So a divine claim on the firstborn is essentially a claim on the absolute best, the strongest, the most vital resource that a family possesses. But the text also zooms out to a macro-level perspective. Earlier, in Exodus 4, the sources note that Israel itself, as an entire nation, is identified as God's firstborn among all the nations of the earth.
That dual application is crucial. You have a localized, literal mandate involving the firstborn of individual households,
Right.
which simultaneously acts as a metaphor for Israel's unique, elevated status on the global stage.
Okay, so the mechanics of how they handled the literal firstborns, specifically the animals, this reveals so much about the ancient economy. The rules regarding donkeys are a perfect example of
The
that.
donkey rule is fascinating.
Right, because a donkey was considered an unclean animal within their religious framework, meaning it could not be offered on a sacrificial altar, so the law required the owner to ransom the donkey by trading a lamb or a goat for it.
And if they didn't?
If the owner refused to pay that ransom, the text explicitly mandates that they must break the donkey's neck.
The visual of breaking a really valuable work animal's neck is jarring,
Extremely jarring.
but it reinforces the absolute, non-negotiable nature of the consecration. To grasp the mechanics here, we have to define the Hebrew concept of a ransom. In this specific cultural context, ransoming an entity means returning an animal or a person to its original secular everyday use.
You are essentially buying your tractor back.
Yes. Perfect analogy. The family desperately needs that donkey to plow the fields and transport goods. So by substituting a lamb, they regain the legal right to use their beast of burden.
And since they obviously could not sacrifice their human children, the firstborn sons also had to be ransomed.
And this is where the historical context provides just a stark ideological contrast. The Holman notes highlight a really profound divergence between Israeli practices and those of the surrounding cultures.
Right, because surrounding Canaanite and regional cultures were actively sacrificing their children in these desperate attempts to appease their deities or secure agricultural fertility.
Yeah, exactly. Instituting a mandatory monetary or animal ransom for a human firstborn was a direct, calculated rejection of those neighboring pagan rituals. God implements a hard boundary. The system explicitly states that while the firstborn belongs to God, human sacrifice is strictly forbidden. They must be bought back to ensure their safety.
Wow.
What's fascinating here is how this mandate functions as a permanent, living memorial. God claims the firstborn of Israel as a perpetual reminder that he spared them when he struck the firstborn of Egypt. It established this generational rhythm of remembrance while simultaneously drawing an unyielding ethical line regarding the sanctity of human life.
That generational rhythm transitions us directly into the second major theme of our sources today, which is the aggressive preservation of memory. Following all those laws of the firstborn, Exodus 13 outlines the strict instructions for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The text is so insistent on the act of remembering. It commands parents to explicitly tell their children, "This is because of what the Lord did for me." And it's just a fascinating approach to historical preservation. Today, if we want to remember a monumental event, we rely on digital archives. We take hundreds of photos on our smartphones. We set calendar alerts. The ancient Israelites utilized immersive, multi-sensory dietary restrictions to achieve the exact same goal.
Because memory, in this ancient context, was never intended to be a passive mental exercise.
Right.
It was a rigorous, lived experience. The text commands that these specific laws and narratives should serve as a sign on your hand and a memorial between your eyes.
Which implies a deeply physical, almost bodily integration of the history.
Absolutely. And NAA Study Bible notes explore the subsequent phrase, instructing that the law of the Lord should be in your mouth. Now, this extends far beyond the physical act of chewing unleavened bread for 7 days.
It's not just a menu item.
Not at all. It is a directive to accept, meditate upon, and continuously speak about the historical deliverance. By physically placing the narrative in their mouths through out-loud recitation during these sensory-rich meals, the memory of the Exodus became an unavoidable, highly visible daily reality.
It is an ingenious educational model. A physical monument can eventually be ignored as part of landscape, but a mandatory society-wide shift in diet, coupled with a required script recited to the next generation, that ensures the history survives.
It forces the conversation.
Exactly. And within that required script, there is a prominent repeating motif: the strong hand. The text emphasizes repeatedly that with a strong hand, the Lord brought you out.
And the deliberate repetition of the strong hand serves as a direct theological counterweight to Pharaoh's famously hardened heart.
Because we have to contextualize Pharaoh's global standing at this exact moment in history.
Yes, he was just a local king.
He was the most powerful sovereign on the planet. He possessed unmatched military might, a thriving economy, an arsenal of advanced chariots. He was viewed by his people as a literal living deity.
A living deity who fully believed his infrastructure was completely impenetrable. Yet the phrase strong hand demonstrates a total asymmetry of power. This was not a prolonged, evenly matched military conflict. God's strong hand dismantled the entirety of the Egyptian empire's infrastructure with incredible ease.
And imprinting that specific memory.
The realization that divine power effortlessly overrides the greatest military superpower on earth.
Yes.
It was a strategic necessity. The Israelites were about to face a hostile desert and heavily fortified enemies. They desperately needed the internalized memory of that strong hand to secure their future fidelity and, honestly, to prevent mass desertion when things inevitably became difficult.
And the difficulty of their journey becomes apparent almost immediately upon leaving Egypt, largely due to the route they take. Here's where it gets really interesting. The text details a massive, deliberate detour, rather than taking the most direct, efficient route to their destination.
The coastal road.
Exactly, the northern coastal road, straight through the land of the Philistines. But God actively routes them away from it. Taking the scenic route while fleeing a hostile empire seems tactically absurd.
It absolutely appears absurd until we examine the archaeological realities of that specific coastal road. Our source notes provide excellent military context here. That northern route was the ancient equivalent of an international high-traffic highway.
Right.
But it was not just a road. archaeologists have confirmed that Egypt maintained a dense, highly fortified string of military outposts all along that Mediterranean coast.
So the absolute shortest path was essentially an active militarized zone, fully garrisoned by the very empire they were attempting to escape.
Precisely. And the strategic assessment was clear. If a massive, completely disorganized population of traumatized, unarmed, newly freed slaves suddenly marched headlong into a wall of armed Egyptian fortresses,
Followed immediately by heavy Philistine opposition,
the psychological shock would have been catastrophic.
the text itself notes that God knew facing immediate, overwhelming warfare would cause the people to panic, reverse course, and voluntarily return to slavery in Egypt just to survive.
They would have turned right around. Therefore, the diversion southeast into the desert was a highly calculated psychological and tactical maneuver. The desert presented immense logistical challenges, sure, but it shielded them from immediate military slaughter.
Right.
Furthermore, it allowed God to manage their development as a nation, and, strategically, it set the geographic trap for Pharaoh's pursuing army later on.
And that geographic trap culminates in one of the most heavily debated locations in biblical archaeology, the crossing of the sea.
Oh, absolutely.
For centuries, Western tradition has visualized this event at the Red Sea. But the NIA notes dedicate significant space to a complex translation debate regarding the actual body of water. The literal Hebrew phrase in the ancient text is Yam Suf.
And the translation of Yam Suf is a remarkable intersection of linguistics, botany, and historical geography. A really prominent camp of modern scholars translates the phrase as the Sea of Reeds or the Sea of Papyrus.
Now, if we follow the botanical evidence, translating it as papyrus completely changes the map.
It changes everything.
Papyrus plants require fresh water, or, at the very least, brackish, shallow marshland to grow. They absolutely cannot survive in the deep, highly salinated salt water of the Red Sea or the Gulf of Suez.
Right. Because of this ecological restriction, many historians theorize the crossing did not occur at the Red Sea proper. Instead, they point to a network of massive marshy lakes located northeast of the Red Sea.
And this theory is actually bolstered by external ancient documentation, specifically the Egyptian Anastasi III papyrus.
Which is a huge piece of the puzzle.
It is, because this document provides an ancient Egyptian account of a papyrus lake situated near the city of Ramesses, which aligns seamlessly with the biblical starting coordinates of the Israelite Exodus.
It really does. The papyrus lake theory offers a very strong geographical fit. But linguistics is rarely a settled science.
True.
There is a robust counter-argument within the scholarly community asserting that the Hebrew root word sup has no connection to papyrus whatsoever. Some linguists trace the root to an entirely different word meaning end.
End.
Under that linguistic framework, Yam Suf is not the Sea of Reeds, but rather the Sea of the End.
A sea of the end.
Yes, and to the ancient Israelites, this would signify the sea at the very edge of the known world, a definitive watery boundary separating their past in Egypt from an entirely unknown future.
That carries so much weight. And adding even more complexity to the debate is the Septuagint.
Right, the early Greek translation.
Exactly. When ancient scholars translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek centuries later, they interpreted Yam Suf as the Erythraean Thalason, which literally translates into English as the Red Sea. So the tradition of calling it the Red Sea isn't some modern invention. It is an incredibly ancient interpretation.
It is. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the intense debate over the exact GPS coordinates, whether it was a treacherous, impassable marshland near Ramesses or the deep, violent waters of the Gulf of Suez that can sometimes obscure the primary focus of the text.
Right.
The narrative emphasis remains entirely on the insurmountable magnitude of the barrier. The Israelites were trapped between the most advanced military force of the ancient world and an uncrossable expanse of water.
Yeah.
The theological point is that their deliverance came from an objectively impossible situation.
And amidst the chaos of approaching that impossible barrier, the text includes a highly specific, almost haunting logistical detail. The bones. As the Israelites are hastily packing and fleeing for their lives, Moses ensures that the bones of Joseph are carried out of Egypt with them. Taking the time to transport an ancient sarcophagus during a desperate escape requires an explanation.
It absolutely does. And the explanation requires tracing the narrative centuries back to Genesis 50.2425. As Joseph was dying, he forced the leaders of the Israelites to swear a binding solemn oath. Joseph possessed an unwavering belief in the divine promise made to Abraham that Egypt was just a temporary sojourn, not their permanent homeland.
He knew they wouldn't stay.
Right, he made them swear that when God eventually intervened to lead them out, they would exhume his bones and carry them to the promised land.
So Moses is honoring a covenant made hundreds of years prior to his own birth. The NAA notes actually draw a really compelling theological line from this act straight to the New Testament book of Hebrews.
Yes, because transporting those ancient bones was far more than an act of ancestral reverence. It functioned as a profound, tangible demonstration of national faith. The physical presence of Joseph's remains was undeniable proof that they believed in the future blessings God had sworn to deliver. For every Israelite marching through the dust, looking at that sarcophagus was a visceral reminder of a better heavenly country. It reinforced that their identity was not defined by their enslavement in Egypt.
They were quite literally carrying the promises of the past to guarantee their future. It's beautiful. And as they carried those bones into the desolate wilderness, they were provided with the ultimate ancient navigation system. The chapter concludes with the iconic imagery of the pillar of cloud guiding them by day and the pillar of fire providing light by night.
The pillars are undeniably spectacular phenomena, but their purpose extended far beyond just serving as a localized compass or a source of illumination. The sources emphasize that these pillars represented the direct, physical, and localized manifestation of God's actual presence among the people.
God was not just issuing directions from a distance. The text portrays him as personally leading the vanguard, physically moving ahead of the camp.
Exactly. And this establishes one of the most vital theological motifs in the entire biblical narrative, the physical dwelling of the divine presence. The exact same presence manifesting here as cloud and fire on the edge of the wilderness will continue to evolve and travel with them. It is the same presence that will later descend upon Mount Sinai.
The same presence.
The presence that will hover over the Ark of the Covenant, the power that will provide the daily manna, and the glory that will eventually fill the tabernacle. It initiates a sustained, highly visible reassurance that as they leave the structured civilization of Egypt for a terrifying, unmapped desert, they are under constant divine escort.
So what does this all mean? When we synthesize the extensive historical, geographical, and cultural data from our sources today, Exodus 13 transforms from a simple travel itinerary into a masterclass on how a fractured, enslaved population is rebuilt into a distinct nation.
Very well said.
It is a blueprint for memory making, engineering immersive, society-wide rituals that force future generations to physically grapple with their history of captivity and rescue. It reveals a tactical divine protection that actively circumvents disaster, even if it requires marching an entire population into the desert to avoid fortified military checkpoints.
Right?
Furthermore, it is a testament to the power of enduring faithfulness, whether that means honoring a centuries-old oath to transport the bones of an ancestor, or having the courage to follow a massive pillar of fire into the absolute unknown. It is the real-time documentation of a people learning the difficult, step-by-step mechanics of freedom.
It really is. And a profound realization of that freedom can actually be drawn from the linguistic nuances we explored earlier. I'll leave you with a final thought to consider. If the ancient Hebrew phrase Yam Sup truly carries the translation the sea of the end, consider the metaphorical weight of that location. For the ancient Israelites, and perhaps reflecting patterns in our own lives, profound transitions often require journeying to the very edge of the known world. You are forced to stand before an impossible, uncrossable expanse, and only by stepping into the end of the world as you have always known it, can you finally sever the ties to your old life and step forward into genuine liberation.
A brilliant and challenging thought to conclude our discussion. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the history, the hidden cultural dynamics, and the fascinating complexities of the ancient world. As we close our time together, please know that God blesses all the listeners. Take care of yourselves, have an incredibly purposeful week, and we will see you next time.